Yes, thank you so very much for having me today. This is all about creating influence and designing a research socialization strategy that works. Now, I won't tell you too much more about me, but to give you a little bit of background, I've been in the design and research world for about 14 years now, and I've worked in consulting, doing large digital transformation projects, as well as in-house and startups, usually as researcher number one or in a very, very, very small research team. But I'd like to get to know all of you as well. So jump in the chat and let me know your role and location, and also how would you rate the level of impact research is having in your organization today? I'll give us a few minutes. 4, okay, pretty good. 3, 3.5. Some improvement to be made. A 2, okay. All right, I'm hoping I can help you out today, Stephen. Yeah. Argentina, hello. I'm coming to you from New York today. So thanks for sharing your location. It's great to have such a global community. Some 2s and 3s. Okay. Okay, good. Well, I'm hoping I can help you out today. So the agenda for today, we're going to talk through the challenges that I've experienced. Feel free to share your own. I have an approach and a framework to walk you through, and then we'll finish up with some questions. So we should have a good 20 or so minutes for questions. All right. So does any of this sound familiar? And if you've experienced any of these, or if you have a similar scenario, feel free to share that in the chat as well. So have you ever produced a comprehensive research report full of quotes and diagrams and was really rich, only to be told, just send me the executive summary? Does that happen to you? Yes. Or maybe you've realized that your product and design colleagues are circling around a problem area, not realizing that research insights already exist. Yes, many times. Okay, yeah. Yeah, or maybe you're finding it challenging to get your team or stakeholders to engage with research. Biggest yes. Oh, okay. All right. Yes to all. Okay. And if you have any similar or different experiences, feel free to put them in the chat too. I'm eager to hear about other challenges you're facing. So these problems remind me of this old saying: if a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear it, did it make a sound? Or if a research study was conducted but no one used it, does the research exist? So as researchers, we are knowledge creators. The more people that have access to and awareness of user research insights, the more impact we can have in the organization. So what we need is a socialization strategy. And this will help us avoid double work, improve awareness of research insights, improve access to research, maybe even make it self-serve, ensure insights aren't sitting on the shelf, and create influence and increase impact of our work. But not every organizational culture or stakeholder group is the same. So what might have worked in your last role may not resonate in your new one. Each organization makes decisions slightly differently, and different groups of people have different preferences for consuming information. So what do we do? like any good design process, it's good to understand the current state. So, who are the people who consume research and what environment do they exist within? It's important to understand how your company operates so that you can work within those existing behaviors and meet your stakeholders where they are, or conversely, make decisions to change them. This is where our skill set as researchers and designers comes into play. And if we take a human-centered design approach to developing a socialization strategy, we can ensure that our work is valued and impactful. And so that's what I'm going to walk you through today. So first things first, the stakeholder groups, or the people who are going to consume the research. So this is when you get to know the people in a little bit more depth. So understanding them helps you not only craft the study and the deliverables in a way that speaks to them, it also ensures that your work gets traction because they will see themselves in the work. They will have their questions answered. So if you build connections with your stakeholders, getting to know them, what their experience with UXR has been in the past, how do they make decisions, what's their appetite for complexity or density of information, and this might change depending on the level that people operate within the organization or their role. What decisions are they hoping to make with research? What business or personal goals are they trying to achieve? This is also really helpful when you're trying to build trust with somebody and elevate the practice of research. And then, do they have any current hypotheses or deeply held beliefs? And understanding all of that will help you work with them and help you translate research plans and findings in a way that speaks to them. All geared towards helping you get more buy-in and traction with your work. So the second thing to keep an eye on is the organizational culture. So I invite you to take an observant eye to this one. Some things to think about. How does the organization share information? What are the touch points, channels, tools, behaviors? Where and how is information stored, if at all? I've been in organizations where it was very rigorous, and I've also been in organizations where everybody did something different. I see some nodding. Is there a preference for written documentation or verbal presentations? Again, this seems to be company preference sometimes. Is the company remote or distributed? Or is there some in-person contact time? This might help you answer whether you should be synchronous or asynchronous in your sharing. And then, do these preferences differ by group? Do they differ between teams or pods, or do they differ depending on the level of altitude that you're working at? So armed with this information, you'll be better positioned to design a socialization strategy for your organization. And the goal of our socialization strategy is to create moments and places where people can connect with the work and with you in a way that's meaningful for them. So here's where we start ideating. And I find it helpful to think about the research process in terms of a journey map. So how do you want your team and stakeholders to experience the research process at every phase? We don't just necessarily need to think about the end deliverable anymore, but by bringing and sharing insights early and often with your team and stakeholders, helps them and you think about how to engage them at all stages of the process. And by finding ways to bring stakeholders into the process, it helps you build trust and awareness and creates more research advocates as well along the way, which is also really, really helpful. So this is an example of how you might break down the research process into phases. And this is what's helped me in the past. So each phase has a slightly different goal and a slightly different output. For example, in the plan phase, you might be creating buy-in and aligning with your team on goals, timeline, scope, as you move forward into actually recruiting people, participants, conducting the work and synthesizing findings. You move forward into gather and synthesis phase, where you might be sharing initial findings and starting to build awareness of your process and methods and findings. And then as you move forward into deliver, this is where you're answering those initial questions, you're building more empathy, you might be validating or invalidating hypotheses, identifying opportunities, making recommendations, or even facilitating next steps, or whatever they may be. So you'll see in a moment why defining your phases becomes important. Okay, so socialization methods, and this is where the strategy starts to come to life. So if we take our learnings about the people and the culture, and then we marry them with the journey or the experience that you want to create, we start to build our strategy. So when evaluating socialization methods, there's a few things to think about. Number one, content density, and we spoke a little bit about this earlier, but generally speaking, the higher up in an organization that you go, the appetite for content dense presentations reduces. So keep your audience top of mind here. And if you have a variety of audiences, that's worth keeping track of as well. So I find the bite, snack, and meal framework really helpful here. It's a great way to categorize the types of content you share. So if you haven't heard of that before, it's where a bite-sized piece of content might be a quote from an interview, a snack is a little bit larger, it might be an insight nugget or an executive summary, and then a meal is obviously more dense again, and that might be the full report. Whether to share synchronously or asynchronously is also another question you should think about. And this is where the cultural preferences come into play. So sharing synchronously has its advantages. You can add context, you can present in person, and people can ask you questions. I generally find that it's the discussion time in these moments when presenting that help the team internalize the content and move forward in a more meaningful way. Sharing asynchronously, on the other hand, maybe you have a team that's dispersed across time zones, or maybe people have limited availability, and therefore async works best here. Sharing async also helps you reach a wider audience, so you might play with the trade-offs there, depending on what your goals are. And then one way to combine the two might be to record a presentation and then make it available to the whole organization. So there are ways you can combine as well to whatever fits your need. The third one here is shelf life. So this is something that can be ephemeral, like a status update, or maybe it needs to be more findable in the future and therefore have a longer shelf life. The determining factor here might be how the study ties into overarching company and business strategy. So for example, are you answering a question that is helping deliver short-term answers or longer-term, helping make longer-term decisions? You might decide that a large content-dense report should have a long shelf life, for example, whereas insights or bites shared over Slack might have a shorter shelf life, and that might be how you break things up. All right, so the next couple of slides, I've outlined some methods. And this is what's helped me out in the past, but it's definitely not exhaustive. So you'll see that I'm tying these back to the work we've already done. For example, the gray columns are related to culture and consumption preferences, whereas the purple columns are related to the phase of the journey. So again, looping it back to the experience that we want to create. And then you'll also notice we have an evergreen column there, and that helps you start to think about shelf life. So I'll walk through just a couple of these and we can discuss with Q&A at the end if that's helpful. But I'm going to dive into the group workshop one here because it's a great tool and it can be used in a couple of different ways. So for example, in the plan phase, maybe you have a list of research questions and you need your team to prioritize them. A facilitated prioritization workshop can help you align really quickly here. On the other hand, in the gather phase, maybe, and this is something I've done in the past, and it helps teams ingest and interpret raw data. So bringing them into a synthesis workshop can be really helpful here. And it helps them feel part of the research process and also gives them access to early insights, which everyone is always really excited about. We have a few more methods here. Quiz is a fun one, and it's not something that I've seen widely used, so I wanted to dive into that one today. Because it can be a really engaging way to share interim findings with your team, and it works really well for teams who are time poor or who need some encouragement to engage with research. So by framing key takeaways of the study in terms of a true or false or a multiple choice question, findings become more memorable, engaging, and consumable. And it's also a great way to spark deeper conversations about why, and that's ultimately what you want people to walk away with. And because a quiz is somewhat ephemeral, I wouldn't recommend it as a final deliverable, which is why it's there under the gather and synth column as a way to share interim findings. Journey mapping is also another fun one. It can be used in a couple of different ways. It can be used as a collaborative work session to help teams interpret and internalize raw findings in a similar way that the group synthesis workshop worked in that I just mentioned. Or it can be used as a deliverable. That might be more what you're familiar with. And it highlights the key takeaways and opportunity areas. Now, one thing I would say is if you're working on a large study or with multiple levels of stakeholders, it's a good idea to select a few socialization tactics so that you're appealing to all interested parties at different altitudes and levels. All right, so we covered a lot of information and it might sound a little complicated, but really it's quite simple. So by putting it all together, this is the framework. And we start by understanding the current state. And then with that, we can define the consumption experience and make it more memorable, engaging, and discoverable. So did you notice that we were simultaneously defining what might live in a repository? For example, anything that we marked as evergreen might become the foundations of a repository or library. So it's working on two levels for us. But like with any good design project, explore, experiment, and prototype and see what works for you. I would really love to hear about how this might help you increase your level of impact in your organization. So give it a go and reach out and let me know how it's going. Keep in touch.